Hello, welcome to the Meeting Tent, an ongoing discussion of the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters: Michael Andron, Levana Tenen, and Daniel Gill. Unfortunately, Adele could not make it today, and we'll miss her, but we'll plug along without her. So this week, I thought we'd delve a little bit more into the alphabet. When you think of Stan's work, it pretty much revolves around the alphabet. It's what they called the book, The Alphabet That Changed the World. And it really comes down to the letters themselves, the meanings, what they represent. And so we're going to have a discussion about how Stan developed that idea. We talked before about how originally he had shown the reflective aspects of the letters, holding up a flashlight to the hand model and realizing that anybody could do that, to turn something around, you'll see shadowgrams. But he always stressed that the importance was the meaning. So that's why we want to get a little bit deeper into that. So let's start with another older clip that I found that we did in 1990. And this is Stan's explaining at the beginning what he was looking for. So let's take a look at this.
What happened recently is, by a series of convergences of ideas, a part of this material that was very speculative and very tentative has become somewhat more real. And that is the idea that each letter has an intrinsic meaning, that there somehow is a universal language, and that Hebrew is part of that system, whatever that universal language is, and that we can use it today. In fact, that in some sense the Hebrew alphabet, if not the current Hebrew language, can be used as a sort of universal translator. And this started with I don't know how long ago it was. I guess maybe back in grade school even, when I first saw the Hebrew alphabet. You look in that book they give you to read from, learn the alphabet from. It gives in English, A is for apple, B is for box, C is for cat. Well, in Hebrew, each of the letters has a name also. And I remember looking as a child at the list of names that went along with each letter and saying, now what's the system here? What? Aleph is an ox. What's an ox? Aleph. Bet is a house. Gimel is a camel. What does this mean? Is there some system to it? Well, apparently there is. And those simplistic meanings for the names of the letters turn out to actually have a deep significance. And it looks like, based on the original simple meanings that are associated with the names of each of the Hebrew letters, there is a logical function, there is a matrix of meaning that gives meaning to each letter in the alphabet, and that those letter meanings and letters correlate with directions in space, with that 27-line structure that we've been talking about, in the 27 lines on the general cubic surface. Okay.
So there's so much in the book that covers this idea, but this is the kernel. This is the beginning of his thought process in terms of defining the meanings, not only in terms of their meanings, but how they are organized in the alphabet and the relationship to each other. And so we'll be able to cover some of that and use what he called a matrix to demonstrate those relationships and that organization. Levana, can you tell us more about Stan's thinking on this?
Yeah, a little bit. First, a little thing which was kind of surprising to me because I had forgotten that here back in 1990, the way he expressed it, it sounds as though he was surprised and thought it was, and didn't know quite where it came from, that each letter had its own intrinsic meaning that was deeper than the A is for apple type. Um, and yes, at that particular time, he would have not been anywhere near as familiar with the fact that this is actually fully traditional, that it goes all the way back in terms of traditional knowledge, because he was only just starting to explore that area in a serious way. Where we were living at the time, there were very few resources for exploring traditional Jewish material, which is one reason why at a certain point we moved from California, where that clip was, to the East Coast, where we could meet people who were familiar with the material. But anyway, um, as some of the clips that have probably been already here state, when he was looking at the first verse of Bereshit, he noticed the three statements of 27, that there were 27 letters followed by the 27th letter, and that there were 27 letters in the full alphabet if you count the final letters separately. Three statements of 27. Okay, three statements of 9, excuse me. So, okay, his geometer's mind and his organizational mind said, okay, well, what about 3 levels of 9? You know, what happens with that? Um, at the same time, he was also exploring Arthur Young's material. Sorry, Bill, to have to bring this in at the same time, because you know, but I think we've previously discussed that.
Yeah.
And one of the posters that that was on the screen when Bill was playing that clip uh, basically arranges the 27 letters in 3 layers of 9, and then he started to explore the potential meanings of the letters, looking at different sources and what they said about them. I think we must have, oh, I don't know how many dozen books written by rabbis of various stripes on the Hebrew letters, their meanings and their significance. I mean, he read everything and kind of distilled it all in his mind, and realized that looking deeply at the meanings, he could separate, he could kind of label each of the 3 layers um, as a layer, an archetypal layer for the first 9 letters, basically uh, Aleph through Tet. So, sorry, I have to take my glasses off for this. Um,
I'll put it
and
up.
a layer, yeah, a layer of meanings relating to the spiritual world, our inner world, and then a layer of meanings at the bottom, which related to our physical world. Yeah, that's the poster I'm looking at here. Um, and he just kept thinking and thinking about them. This particular poster was one of the earliest posters that he put together, where he was trying to find glyphs that might express the meaning of each letter in addition to their standard meanings.
He parsed the real spiritual system that is in these really deep Kabbalistic works.
Mm-hmm.
And it just is interesting to see that clip, because I remember sitting with him and just, you know, when I first met him, like being like, wow, what? Wow. But so that's a really neat clip to see. But in this system is, as I think I mentioned before, in the book Shefatal, which part of this is, I think I mentioned this a while back, but part of this is, you know, there was a whole world of scholarship and like importance of scholarship lost in the Holocaust. I mean, amongst thousands or hundreds of thousands of books that were destroyed, many of which have been recovered. There was a whole kind of hierarchy of what you learned and what was popular that had been for quite some time. And Shefatal was one of the most reprinted books in Eastern Europe. There are just dozens of printings of it. And it was extremely popular. And so, to us, it's like, wait, what? I've never heard of it except for a dear friend who lives in Jerusalem turned me onto it. But it has this exact system. I mean, this is the system in the Shefatal, and the Kabbalists even have a name for it. They call it Ik Bechar, and it's a system of biblical exegesis. Like, so you can any letter can be that's in the vertical can be substituted with any other letter in the vertical to draw out different meanings of the text. That's a whole system. I actually met a Kabbalist once who lives in Sfat. Interesting man. And he talked about it, and it was I just couldn't believe it. It's a thing, a known thing. And so it's an interesting way to look at our our consciousness, the outside, the inside, and then the kind of the beyond that, or the archetypal, even more farther beyond that. And you can look through the Jewish year also very much like this. The traditional year you can look through in this manner, in terms of things that, or any system. I mean, it truly actually defines, really, if you think about it. I mean, I'm just most familiar with the Jewish traditional model, but this probably defines many systems. The outer, the inner, and then the archetypal, and you can go through, and I mean, even something as silly as academia. You have a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD. And most people don't make it past the PhD. The postdoc is something special, but you have, in any system, you seem to have these three elements. And somehow Stan is able to translate this, but in a way that is so exact that I would love for Meru to have like a really good source of funding, so we could get teams of people pouring through this from different aspects. Yeah. There's the aspect of the philosophical or the spiritual aspect, which I think is extraordinary. There's the linguistic aspects. You could have someone go through and try to relate this to linguistics, and the kind of science of how people speak would be fascinating. And you could have someone come through looking at astrophysics or physics in general, and different systems within physics, and look at it from that perspective, and then we could coordinate ideas. I just think that would be so exciting. So I'm just putting it out there. I just think that would be. The material's that deep, though. It's that deep. There's so much to it, and Stan's very humble way of presenting and being very belies, this incredible depth that's profound. It's almost like there's a fourth level that he was in touch with that saw the entire system. Yeah.
Maybe we should back up just a little bit in terms of talking about the Hebrew alphabet itself and how we are using the alphabet, how Stan used the alphabet. If somebody's seeing this for the first time, and most people look at the alphabet as a form of a language, which it is, obviously, in Israel. But this is so much deeper than that. There are times that it's been described as a sacred alphabet. That's a term that was used occasionally, and that there are other sacred alphabets like Arabic and Greek, perhaps because they're sacred in the fact that they are the alphabet that wrote sacred texts. There are certain alphabets that perhaps are not considered in that class. I don't think the Latin languages, perhaps, but in any case, each letter represents is what could be called multidimensional. It represents processes. Was something that Stan was very, very big on talking about, in terms of, and again, everything's a verb here. We're talking about things that are happening. For example, the best example he gave was the letter Beit, the meaning house, but what we're looking at is what a house is or what it does, housing the contrast between inside and out. And as he talked about in many videos, that was extremely important in understanding the alphabet and Genesis and the first letter, meaning inside and outside. So I highly suggest going through our video library. And this particular topic probably is best exemplified in the program called Matrix of Meaning for Sacred Alphabets, because that was filmed right after that piece that I showed earlier, where he had just developed this idea of this hierarchy. So I suggest watching that. But in terms of the alphabet itself and what it represents, Michael, I know have studied this a lot in terms of the alphabet, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Every letter in Hebrew, unlike, say, a hieroglyphic shows you a little picture, and one early version of the letter Aleph looks like an ox, the horns of an ox. And you have exactly the same, almost the same sentence saying, oh, and that's the form of an ox, in the character Dao in Chinese. In other words, they're using that idea, but here you have the form of it. In other words, what is its shape? Like Bet is a bayit, is a house. But there are, and he's got a whole list of his translingual puns on the letter Bet in the book, which is lots of fun. But, and there you have Baruch is like break, Bet Reish Chaf. And that's another set. You have Aleph Yud Kuf and Bet Reish Chaf. That's 2 and 220. It's all the twos, like all the ones are lined up. So you have the form of the letter, the shape of it, and what does it look like? Like you had A is, I forget what, apple. Okay, so they'll say Gimel is like a camel, because the word Gamal is a word for camel. But you also have the name of the letter, which doesn't always match the picture of the letter, but gives you another level of depth. And then you have the number, which we kind of trivialize until you have somebody who's really good at doing that. And they find all kinds of beautiful lessons and wisdom just by playing with the numbers.
Yeah, and we're looking
I
at
would like to interject here that actually is not how Stanley was exploring the letters,
right?
In terms of his he only got into dealing with numerical values of letters in a very different way towards the very end of his life, when he started looking at how various words could possibly contain indicators of either important proportions or numerical constants, or he started filtering things by looking at pi, okay, and various values of pi. So and he found some very interesting aspects of the work with that, and some of them, for people who know our website, some of them he wrote up and posted in our old eTourist newsletters, which are on the Meru.org website. They were not, that material is not included in the book because he was researching it after. What Stanley did do in terms of pulling apart words was take his generalized meanings, the what he considered to be the verbalized, the verb meaning of any particular letter, and he would start to see what those meanings would combine to be, and then he would go to like 3 different Hebrew dictionaries to find potential meanings that would allow for him to take a word, pull it apart, look at the meaning of each individual letter, and what kind of emotion or relationship would that imply. I don't offhand know if he did that on any of the videos. If he did, it would have been in one of the later ones.
Lavana, would you say that of those three areas that I mentioned, form, name, and number, the number was the last one that he engaged, but form certainly, and meaning, the name of the letter, those were the two that he
It depends
was.
what number you're talking about. He didn't refer
Yeah.
to gematria that once in a while, but he was talking about the base 3 numeric system.
What
Right.
he did coming from basically an untraditional perspective,
Right.
because he had no background, but except as somebody who was mathematically trained, and at that point it's obvious, 27, 3 layers of 9. Oh, okay, let's plot this on a 3D Cartesian graph, which is, if for people who don't remember their junior high school mathematics, which I suppose is probably most everybody, or at least most everybody over 50. You youngsters who are watching this, you're way ahead of me. But the idea is that you've got an axis that goes up and down, an axis that goes this way, and an axis that goes this way. In other words, a mapping of our 3D world. Oh, okay. So let's put Aleph at the origin. That would be 0, 0, 0. Let's put Yud at the next level up. That would be 1, 0, 0. And then you've got, what do you have here?
Kuf.
Kuf,
Kuf
yeah.
would be,
Oh,
yeah.
Aleph is 0, 0, 0. Then you've got Yud, and then you've got Kuf.
Wow.
Basically,
Hmm.
if you take a look at, there is a diagram that's going to be shown here, which has to do with a Rubik's Cube, and which Stanley used a lot
There,
in
I'll
his
put that up.
tapes. And there you can see, this would be, you've got this axis, you've got this axis, and you've got this axis. So, okay. So that's what he means by base 3. If you think of it as Cartesian coordinates of, just a 3D mapping of our reality, then that implies certain relationships between the first level, the next level, and the third level. And again, he was coordinating this in terms of what each level was talking about with the work of Arthur Young and his theory of process, basically how things become themselves. And that is a mapping that, if we didn't go through it on a previous video, we should do that at some point. I'm not prepared to do it right now.
Yeah, we did earlier. And there is also one of the videos. I think it's the second video we did as a kind of a companion to the alphabet that changed the world. He went pretty deeply into Arthur's work and how he developed the system.
Interestingly enough, I remember Stan saying, gematria, he said, never occurred to me. I remember when he said, he kind of realized this. He said, it actually sounds like the word geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he started saying, wait a minute, there are angles here. There's ratios, there's angles. And he said pretty definitively, I don't think gematria means gematria. I think it somehow the idea got lost. I really think it meant originally geometry. And if you think
probably true.
Yeah, it probably is. And I think it is. And if you think about ancient systems of knowledge, the music, the geometry, the mathematics, everything was based around the religion, and everything was housed within the different temples. That's how it went down. That's how they rolled in the ancient world. And so if you think about it in that context, then sacred geometry is a seminal concept, really. And so I think he got onto that. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is, so he's unpacking this in 3 dimensions, which is the construct we inhabit, or so we think we do, but that's at least what we perceive. But he took those ideas of 3 dimensions And I remember having conversations with him, and he took to 4 dimensions and to 5 dimensions and to 6. He took it up to 10, I think it was 10 dimensions. He had a whole system of like how that works. And I, I unfortunately my composer brain was not capable of understanding, but the system of geometry and the system of the different dimensions he was accessing or could see into how this system. I just remember having conversations with him that like this system works throughout the entire all the dimensions, anyway, I saw it's just interesting to know. So
me too.
But do you remember that? Do you remember him talking about
no,
the different?
Actually, I don't remember that specific conversation, but I know that it's something that he would do.
Yeah.
Gematria is not a Hebrew word anyway. It sounds Aramaic, and the spelling of it would imply that it's Aramaic.
Oh, interesting.
Which would be from the spoken language of the people. And so probably related to other things going on in society at the time, and therefore geometry.
Yeah, I remember him having
the Greek. Maybe it's Greek.
I think it's Greek. Yeah, I mean,
it's a Greek word.
Yeah, I remember him having an entire thing about there were a couple gematrias, like the traditional gematrias, I think he liked, but very few. Very, very few, really. He liked echad, that equal 13. That meaning a numerical value of something, if it had resonance within actual geometry and actual mathematics, I think he took seriously. But otherwise, he didn't. The system, right. So echad, for example, 13. I just remember again some conversation where that was just like that had to do with these 13 dimensions. Yeah.
Okay, and it also has to do with the fact that, again, focusing on geometry, the cube octahedral sphere packing, right. Basically the closest packing of spheres in 3 dimensions forms a cube octahedral shape, which has 12 around 1. Right. And then the next layer of that, if you try to pack on top of that, is 42, which he was coordinating with the quote unquote 42 types of second matter, which is described in which he found in an early translation of the introduction to the Zohar, and that the number 42 caught his attention because, again, if you're going to be packing spheres, and there's a model, Bill, I think you have pictures of it, a particular model where he created basically nested little walls of 3 layers of, but anyway, that was the thing about 13, was the geometric significance of that was just immediately obvious to him. And then he started, thinking about, what are other instances of 13, or rather 12 around 1, yada, yada, yada. And his brain would just take off and try and find resonances in other fields.
When he would, and this I did have a conversation. We had too few conversations, but he would say, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Bill, that you could take a shape and just kind of twist it, and eventually, whatever it was, you would find the shapes of letters with shadows and so on. And so he needed something else to make it science to him,
give it meaning,
rather than just an idea. But Kabbalists say the same thing. They'll tell you that there are certain gematrias that are, but they know full well that with all these possibilities of permutations and combinations of letters and numbers and dimensions, you can almost prove anything you want.
Right. Exactly.
Especially if you have a computer doing it like the Bible code approach. You can pretty much search anything and find meaning to it. And so they all were self-limiting. I think the biggest advantage that Stan had was that he didn't come from a traditional background, but came from an untraditional background, because that would have locked him into a box and would have said, well, you can't veer off into geometry and sacred And he'd say, why not?
Right.
You know,
Yeah, he
it's
never
knowledge, and it didn't matter as long as there was no war. But if you're an ultra-Orthodox Kabbalist, you simply don't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
The
even if it's
politest
shown
thing-
to you, you won't see it.
the politest thing that they would say is, "I'm not qualified to understand," which is certainly true.
Which is good for them.
Right.
And that's to their credit.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was the honest response that we used to get.
Yes.
Yeah.
From people who weren't afraid, but who really understood that this was something outside of their experience. And as time went on, we were, very few, but people would understand that Stanley was really onto something. They just felt that they couldn't understand what.
Right.
And also be able to delineate to others, which is still
Right.
today the problem. So
Right.
I just one thing I want to show
Fair
you.
enough.
So this is wild. So I wrote this string quartet dedicated to Stan, and it was this whole idea that it came to me like right after Shiva, like this whole, it was like downloaded in my brain. I can show you what I wrote. It's really wild. It was like the whole thing went, here you go, here's a piece, and so I recorded like the time, like I wanted to see how much it was. So we went through, I'm rehearsing with this string quartet, very super talented group of people. And really like the first violinist is playing a Stradivarius. So he has on loan. So my piece was performed with it. Yeah, it's unbelievable. It was mind blowing. Great people. I love them to death. But anyway, so we went through the first, just going through, okay, I'll try this. We were rehearsing it. And they said, okay, let's run it. And so I right when they started, I hit the timer. I wanted to see how long it was.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time, it was the real first run through. Check this out. I took a screenshot. It was like, like, what? Like,
It was like, hi.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
So, and the whole concept of the piece is about oneness, and so, and God's name, and what. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you that was like.
Can't you just see Stan sitting there laughing with Stradivarius sitting next to him, and they're both going, "You got it, good for you."
Actually, I can't.
Actually, yeah.
And you got to explain to our audience what the significance of those numbers are.
Okay, so despite 13, actually in the Jewish tradition, 13 is actually quite a lucky number because again, it's the numerical value of the word one, or oneness, really. And so what's neat about
and also the word ahava, which means
and the word
love.
ahava, yeah, exactly. So oneness and love have this deep thing,
Ahava means love in Hebrew.
Yeah. And love and oneness actually has to do with in a traditional way. And I remember actually having a conversation with Stan about this was, again, a particularly good mantra because of the word ahava and because of the word one he found significant.
And if you add them, you come back to 26, which is
right,
God's name.
Which is the value of God's name, right? So here you have, so the entire piece was this inspiration that just from knowing Stan and just getting this kind of download of this idea for a composition, which is to date, it's my most highly, like within the, like a highly structured piece of music. I mean, it's just unbelievably exact, which is effective actually to have that much structure, turns out. But it turned again, now what's interesting, so it's 1313. What's interesting is when I ran it through the computer just to get the time, it was 13.01. That was the exact number. So like it was already weird, and I told my friend, like, this is wild. But then I was like, okay, well, it's just a computer, we'll see. And so when at the actual rehearsal, when we first ran it, that was the number, and it just correlates exactly to this idea of oneness and love and God, actually, and of course dedicated to Stan.
But what's 13.13.66? What does that signify?
I don't. I mean,
well,
I'll
take a shot. Okay, I'll take a shot at the 66 because the 1313 is easy. We already said that, but 6, the number 6 is the letter Vav. It's a straight line. First of all, 6 and 6 are 12, and it's all in a 12 geometric shape around the one that creates the 13.
Yeah.
But Vav is the first time Vav is used in the Torah, because that's another way people count things, is its supposed deepest meaning is et hashamayim v'et haaretz. V'et means and, because vav is a connector. The word literally means hook, like the hooks that held up the curtains in the tabernacle in the desert. So the 6 is like, it's a way of saying, you know, God sent this vav, this ray of light into the world at creation, and our job is to take the vav back up, is to take it and go forward. So the 6-6,
that's unbelievable.
Puts the two together, becomes 12, and is also, what is it hooking?
Yeah,
it's hooking God and man.
Wow,
and man and God.
That's exactly, that's eerie, that's spooky, but that's exactly the concept of the piece. I mean, literally, you have the descent of light and the ascent of man, of consciousness. That's exactly it. That as God's light descends, we see it as greater. Of course, to God, it's much lesser. But as it descends, so then we have more an ability to go up. That's unbelievable.
We're hearing what would be a Kabbalistic dissertation on the alphabet, and this is what Kabbalists do. They find all these different meanings and combinations, and I mean, like you said, it is endless, the possibilities, and that's the beauty of it. But it's also a lifetime, you know, a task. But it's not what Stan's doing. You know, and that's why I want to play this video. There is a relationship. I don't mean to say
it was. I mean, he did explore words. He did one of the things that we used to do sitting around our kitchen table in Sharon was go through and, you know, go through particularly the important words and explore them by going as deeply into each word in the context of some basic text that we were reading, and going through these traditional texts, particularly texts of Kabbalah or you know, other kinds of works, looking at the words in that fashion, it really enhanced and deepened the meaning. And again, it was only later that we found out this is traditional. One thing I want to note in terms of what Michael was saying, for people who are completely unfamiliar with the Hebrew tradition, that Adam in this case was created before the creation of male and female. So Adam is just general human.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah. And, you know, the four of us know that, but you guys might not have.
Right.
So, yeah, don't worry. Ladies, don't worry about it. You know, this includes us.
100%. Yeah.
It's human. Okay. Let's, I think we'll just have time to go through one of these, and it is a little bit lengthier than most of the clips I show, but this is going to be Stan going through that first vertical level of letters. So,
all right, here we have Aleph. It's spelled in Hebrew, Aleph Lamed Pei, or final Pei. It's final Pei. Here's the English Aleph. This Pei, F sound is a PH or a P. Okay. It refers in simple meaning to an ox, for who knows why. The standard linguistic theory is that the hieroglyphic that originally in Old Canaanite Semitic form looked a little like an ox became the A. There may be something to that, but I think there's deeper meaning. The basic meaning, though, is that the Aleph is all one, is all consciousness, is the whole thing taken together, is everything. It's the head and tail of the snake, it's the splice point, it's the archetype itself. It's the highest, greatest, biggest, the whole thing. It's a stand-in term, a letter for God in a sense. Well, if we look over at the English now, we find the same letters, A, L, and P, are an alp. Or if we allow ourselves to vary the vowels as we see fit, aloof, or perhaps alive. The V sound is very similar to the F sound and is often interchangeable with it. And so that's a perfectly good transformation. Well, a great life, aloof, the high point, that's certainly a sense of Aleph. Also, if we allow some permutations in the order of the letters, if this is A-L-P, Aleph Lamed Fe, then P-L-A, Fe Lamed Aleph, has a meaning in Hebrew. It means a miracle. Its cognate in English, the sound cognate, would be P-L and perhaps an O, a W to extend it. But plow, fella, plow, plow, that would be the connection to our sense of ox. I think that's one of the weakest associations on the whole table, but let's put that out anyway. Another permutation would be APL, Aleph Pei Lamed. That would be cognate to our idea of awful. God is awe-inspiring, is truly awful, full of awe. It's also cognate to the Greek god name, Apollo, which Robert Graves says is an equivalent of apple, or one, meaning not many, a meaning not, and Apollo being cognate to our word full, meaning many. That's the traditional translation of Apollo. And Apollo is supposed to be a geometric object related to this apple form also. Another meaning in Hebrew for A, P, and L, Aleph, Pei, and Lamed, is dark. And that's a sense of awful, the dark, the hidden. We could also permute it into cognates that have the meaning of flow or fly, leap or loop, the peel of the apple, the pole. All of these are connected in English cognates with the actual meaning of an Aleph in Hebrew. Well, if Aleph is all consciousness, is the great light, is the all one, then Yud, if you come down a bit, should be that same idea, the great existence, the great life principle itself, applied internally and spiritually. And so it is. The Hebrew name is Yod. It's pronounced as an I or a Y sound, an E-ish I sound. It literally means a hand, or to point, or a pointer. Sometimes it's referred to as the hand of God even. It's the first initial of God's four-letter name. And it denotes the future tense as a prefix in some verb usages, not all. If you go over to the English side, the English equivalent letter is an I. The Greek letter would be iota, which really means a jot or iota in modern meaning. But if we just look at the Hebrew, the I and the D, that's id. Or, as others have pointed out, it's also the letter that stands for Jewishness. Yehudi, Yehuda, Yud, the same sense, Jew. And that's because the Jew is intended to be the carrier of some internal spiritual consciousness. So that's why that designation. In basic sense, it's inner being or inner consciousness. If this is consciousness, the all consciousness, the great consciousness, that's what the Aleph is, then the Yud is inner consciousness or inner being. Inner spiritual unity, a point, a turn, a step, a spark. The transcendental direction in physics and mathematics, 90-degree rotation, designated in English by the letter I, representing the square root of -1, that's a cognate meaning. Okay? And finally, Kuf, the idea of consciousness, of beingness, applied to the material world. Well, Kuf in Hebrew, spelled Q-O and the PH sound, Kuf, Vav, Pei, means a monkey, a material existence, a skull, or it means an imitation. Cognate to the Hebrew name Kuf is our word cap, the head, the skull, copy, the imitation or the monkey, or equipment, things one uses in the material world to accomplish one's spiritual needs. And it's an outer material consciousness, it's an outer copy of spiritual being. It relates to the root for captain, the idea of the brain rather than the mind, the physical being.
That was an example going through that chart. Now, he spent a lot of time talking about the English equivalents, which he really didn't do later. I mean, at this point, I guess it was important to show the correlation with the English roots.
That's kind of the earliest form of his exploring the idea of what Michael is calling and what we called in the book, the translingual puns. Which he still enjoyed at the time, that we were writing the book, as that there's a whole section about them towards the end of the book. It wasn't his focus, but he never ignored it either. And as I may have mentioned before, I've got stacks of little index cards when he was exploring letters and words and meanings that I've never been able to categorize exactly, because some of the cards, the coordination between the meaning and the letter and so on was either graphic or translingual puns, or, you know, just all kinds of explorations of things. So it's an idea that he always had. He didn't emphasize it in his presentations or in the things that he actually published, but he was still thinking in those terms. And, you know, it was just one factor in the way he was exploring the meaning of both the letters and the words.
I think it's interesting to see it, though. I mean, I think it's helpful for people who aren't familiar with the work, especially
Absolutely.
English-speaking people.
Mhm.
And I think it's a good introduction. Um, this this video goes through, I think it goes through all nine uh, columns.
Yeah.
So I at some point I'll try to redact this video and put it up on
Really
our.
good thing. I mean, actually, I was really interested to watch it. Like, you know, those little oblongs of each letter were something that he did again very early, hand drawn, way before dealing with computers. And a lot of the things that he was saying, you know, is stuff that I've kind of forgotten um, over the decades. Um, but in terms of explaining the structure and the relationship of each letter's place and of each level's place, yeah, that it's actually, if people bear in mind that this was relatively early work, it's actually very helpful because it shows the foundation of what he was basing his later thinking on. So yeah,
Yeah,
we
I will hopefully show more of these in another episode. Maybe next time we'll explore a little bit more of this. I know, Michael, you have a comment, uh, and Daniel, maybe of those three letters, you can show us the hand gestures to see if there's any correlation. If you recall the gestures for those three letters, Olive.
Yeah, they kind of, it's kind of like, I mean, it's hard to do it sitting down, but you're kind of like you're Aleph, and then I think this is Yud, and then you're like he, or is Yud back, or wait, no, Yud
oh
is
no,
no, it's Aleph,
Yud,
Yud.
Yud,
Oh,
something
where's Yud? Is
more,
Yud is
more like that,
here?
just pointing to your heart, pretty much.
Aleph,
Uh,
Yud, and then Kuf is up here, the monkey, like
Yeah.
this. So it's kind of like it's extending almost. It's very interesting. It seems to be, and I wish Adele was here because she could do it
yeah.
And
more
you know,
properly. But it seems to be one of the other. I mean, I actually haven't done that. I know we did that years ago, sitting at your kitchen table, but we went through all of them. But I don't. That's pretty interesting.
well,
We
when you
have the
put them
video.
together, aren't
But
they? They're
but
low,
Harkana is
middle, and
also,
high. They're low,
yeah.
middle, and high, which is a meditative thing in Taoist meditation, yoga meditation. It's going 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, Khuf is up.
Yeah,
Khuf is here. Yeah, the monkey.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
hanging on a branch.
yeah. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
Bahar. I mean, Bahar is also. I mean, it's like, you got from the bait to the
Reach.
Chaf, and then also, like, again, up. It's also 3 levels.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like Reish. Yeah, so it's also 3 levels, and then Galash is here, and then right, and then Shin. It's also 3 levels. Wow, we never did that.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
let's go through
That's
this.
unbelievable. Another
We'll go
time,
through
yeah,
this
sure.
again next time.
Yeah,
Wow.
hopefully when we have Adele here, because she can do it
Yeah,
so
I hope
yeah,
she can make it.
Yeah, she's a
yeah.
master.
She speaks that language.
Right,
yeah,
right.
she's
Yeah,
she's a
Let's
dancer,
let's do
choreographer.
this. We'll continue this on,
Wow, that's
and
wild.
specifically getting into, since we've already
Wow.
introduced the concept. Next time we'll go through. I can use the same. Let's Stan show us the earlier versions, and then we can continue on from how it developed later. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say that this idea of the translingual pun is, which is kind of a frivolous, fun way of describing it, but there's a Kabbalistic teaching that says that at the Tower of Babel, that the primary language was Hebrew, and that at the Tower of Babel, which has the English Babel, which is a perfect example of a translingual pun, the languages got turned around. So there's plenty of Hebrew in English words, and in pick your language, there are things that have, come down, and we kind of look at it and say, okay, well, we're doing that post that one language became 70 languages. Yeah. But in truth, that was the teaching, that one language was now going to come out in a lot of different ways, which
interesting.
I would presume to say, one of which is mathematical or geometrical, and probably on the subatomic thing with DNA, which are also languages. In the people who speak those languages, like I don't speak music, Dan, but you do. And so it becomes music, or it becomes movement. It's more than just Czechoslovakian and English and French. And,
that's good.
It's a concept. It doesn't have to be taken literally, but conceptually, the idea that it shows up in other places should not surprise us.
That's beautiful. What a beautiful idea.
It does, but
something you should have mentioned at the beginning is that we're looking at Hebrew as a formal language, like musical notation, like different symbolic representations of other concepts. So again, we're not looking at it as the alphabet for speaking language, a formal alphabet that has a whole different purpose. Yes.
If each letter is related in a systematic way to certain brain states, certain feelings, which is in a sense the idea behind the gestures for the Hebrew letters as they evolved in Stan's work, then it would make a certain kind of sense that, at least in cultures that have something in common, that various expressions of those letters taken together would have similar meanings. I'm not expressing it very well, but that was the idea behind why he felt it was legitimate to explore the translingual puns, that there actually was some deep core source for the expression of certain feelings with certain letters.
Right. Well, if you're going to have a universal hand language and be able to communicate with other people who don't speak your spoken language, then there's got to be more than one meaning. And it's under the assumption that the person you're talking to knows those different meanings. And so now you're expressing them with the hand gestures.
Well,
so, yeah.
Well, imagine if humanity's consciousness level was elevated. It's a little bit hard maybe in the world right now, but just take a moment and imagine that, like, we've reached this level where consciousness is central and physical is
peripheral,
tangential. Yeah. Right. So then a consciousness language and would be absolutely key to communication. And I think that's what Stan found here.
That's right. And I think the world is leading towards that. We who study these things are more aware of it. But speaking to people of younger generation, they don't use that language. But I think the ideas of consciousness are beginning to emerge in terms of going past just what's in front of you. And I think that although we keep seeing the world as horrible as it is, everybody says that, and maybe that's what the world has to go through to then come out at the other end. But I think that's where we're leading, Dan, and I think that's where this work is going to be of extreme value.
As a grandpa, my
grandpa too,
taking care of my 2.5-year-old grandson who is watching Cocomelon endlessly. I will say that where they're doing sorry, I'm sorry, and thank you, they're teaching ASL, American Sign Language, but there are so many commonalities in gesture. And so the younger generation may come to it easier.
Of course.
Because this is stuff that is it is being taught and shown.
Right. And it'll just have to somehow evolve from the iPad into the real world. So we have to get away from.
Or into one of Elon Musk's chips that we put in our brain.
Maybe that'll do it. But I'm hoping.
Yeah, no, I sure hope not.
I'm hoping it'll be more natural.
Yeah, no, I don't
just
think.
kidding.
I think if we could see from the level of the soul, which is a lofty goal, but if we could, then the iPad would seem absurd to what we can see with our soul's eye.
You know, I was at visiting Sedona the first time I went there.
Me too.
And I went to a pueblo on the way that we stopped at on the way to the Grand Canyon. And though it was a remnant of it, it was almost a an uncovering of ruins. But they would have words on signs and then the English meaning of them. And there were at least 3 or 4 that I discovered that had Hebrew roots in them. And you go to Hawaii and you have the word for the religion, the native religion, Huna. The high priest is the kahuna, also the best surfer. But okay, it's same thing. It's like the chief with the horns, you know. But the kahuna and the word for energy, you know, ruach, chi, ki, prana, is mana. Is the Hebrew word for, you know, or the English translation of man, which was the energy that fed the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. So this has been going on a long time.
Sure.
Maybe we uncovered one little piece of it. They were probably both the Indians or Native Americans that were at that pueblo and the Hawaiians were probably lost tribes who had a language.
Or all this stuff is happening
at the same time. If you think of this as, you know, okay, maybe it is somehow related to the structure and the way the human brain works.
Right.
Yes.
On a natural level.
So that, you know, like many inventions in the world, you know, if tech people, inventors, whatever, it's a really common thing to have the same discovery show up in several different places in the world at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
Or maybe those aliens were able to.
No aliens. Forget it.
You know,
we're not going to. Are you kidding, Lavana? Have you been listening to this conversation? Aliens are only a smidge away from all this.
I'm just familiar with the way that idea has been promulgated in corners of the internet, and on people who have swallowed that idea whole. And you know,
but you know, the irony is
there's more.
The irony is that Stan and Stradivarius were sitting in a spacecraft sending that stuff down to Dan that very day.
No spacecraft.
It's just in a different dimension. That's all.
It doesn't have to be.
That's all it is.
Because spacecraft are physical entities. This is not physical. So all right, folks, we've used up our time. Let's continue this next time. We'll get into Stan showing us these 3 levels and discuss it in even more depth. We're getting into, I think, a higher level of this work. You know, maybe the postgraduate level now, but that's okay. This is our 19th episode, so we're going to keep it going. If you've gotten this far on this video, you should get an award of some sort. But in any case, thanks for watching.
We've gotten a little out of control here.
That's what we do. So anyway, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks again, and have a great, take care.